My husband Dane looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm done pretending, Emily. Lana is everything you're not. Successful, ambitious, perfect. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." What he didn't know was that Lana's husband Henry had been watching them for months, collecting evidence and planning something that would destroy both their lives completely. 3 weeks later, they both lost everything, and I had a front row seat to watch it all unfold.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The words hung in the air like poison, seeping into every corner of our marble-floored kitchen. I stood there, gripping the granite countertop, my knuckles white against the cold surface, watching my husband of 8 years deliver what he clearly believed was his moment of triumph. Dane Ashford had always been methodical. Even in college, he planned everything down to the minute: his study schedule, his career trajectory, even how he proposed to me on that snowy December night 5 years ago. So when he walked into our kitchen that Tuesday evening, still wearing his expensive navy suit from his job at Morrison Associates, I knew this wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was calculated. "Did you hear me, Emily?" His voice carried that same tone he used during client presentations, confident, unshakable, like he was delivering a business proposal rather than ending our marriage. I said, "I'm done." I heard him. Every syllable had landed like a physical blow, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Instead, I studied his face, searching for any trace of the man I had fallen in love with during our sophomore year at Northwestern. The man who used to stay up all night when I had the flu, bringing me soup and terrible jokes. The man who cried when we thought we might not be able to have children. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who looked like Dane, but spoke like a stranger. "Lana Hench," I said quietly, testing the name that had been whispered around his office for months. I'd heard it from mutual friends, caught glimpses of her name in his phone notifications, felt the way he lit up whenever someone mentioned the new senior associate who had transferred from their Chicago branch. That's who this is about. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. If anything, he seemed pleased that I'd figured it out. "She understands ambition," he said, straightening his tie, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken. "She's driven, focused on success. She doesn't spend her days painting landscapes and calling it a career." The dig at my art stung, but not in the way he intended. I had built a modest but respectable business selling commissioned pieces to local galleries and private collectors. It wasn't corporate law, but it paid my bills and fulfilled something in me that his world of billable hours and partnership tracks never could. The fact that he saw my passion as a failure said more about him than it did about me. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm building in my chest. "How long what?" "How long have you been sleeping with her?" For the first time since he'd walked into the kitchen, something flickered across his expression. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at being called out so directly. "It's not about sex, Emily. It's about compatibility. It's about being with someone who shares my goals, my vision for the future." He paused, running a hand through his perfectly styled brown hair. "Lana and I make sense together. We're both partners at the firm now. We understand each other's priorities." I almost laughed at the irony. Dane had made partner 6 months ago, the culmination of years of 70-hour weeks and sacrificed weekends. I had celebrated with him, thrown him a surprise party, believed that finally reaching his goal would mean more time for us. Instead, it had apparently meant more time with Lana. "What about her husband?" I asked, genuinely curious. I'd heard through the office gossip network that Lana was married to someone outside the legal world, though details were scarce. Dane's expression hardened. Henry Victor is an obstacle, but Lana is handling that situation. The casual way he dismissed another man's marriage, another family potentially being destroyed, sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about us anymore. There was another person out there, someone named Henry Victor, who was about to his world shattered, just like mine. I've already spoken to Richard Morrison about the situation, Dane continued, referring to the founding partner of their firm. He's supportive of our relationship. Lana and I are planning to head the new corporate acquisition division together. Of course, it wasn't enough to destroy our marriage, he was also positioning himself professionally with his new relationship. Everything about this was strategic, calculated for maximum benefit to Dane Ashford. I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown until I can find a suitable apartment, he said, pulling out his phone to check the time. Lana is helping me look at places this weekend. I'll send someone for my things tomorrow. The matter-of-fact way he was dismantling our life was almost impressive in its coldness. No emotion, no regret, just logistics. He had already moved on mentally, probably weeks or months ago. I was just the final item on his checklist. The house is in both our names, I said quietly. My lawyer will be in touch about the property division. Given that my income primarily funded the mortgage and renovations, I think we can reach a reasonable arrangement. Even now, he was negotiating. Even in the moment of destroying our marriage, he was thinking about assets and leverage. I watched him check his phone again, probably texting Lana about how the conversation was going. The thought of them discussing my reaction, maybe even laughing about it later over expensive wine, made something cold and hard settle in my stomach.
Is there anything else? He asked, as if we were concluding a business meeting rather than ending 8 years of shared dreams and promises. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The ambition I had once found attractive was actually ruthless selfishness. The confidence I had admired was just arrogance dressed up in expensive suits. The drive that had impressed me was nothing more than a willingness to crush anyone who stood between him and what he wanted. "No," I said finally, "I think you've covered everything." He nodded, satisfied, and walked toward the garage door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, Emily, I hope you find someone who appreciates this." He gestured vaguely at me, at the kitchen, at the life we had built together, as if it were all somehow quaint and insufficient. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the silence of my house, listening to the echo of the garage door closing and the sound of his BMW pulling out of the driveway for the last time. What Dane didn't know was that I had been friends with Henry Victor's sister for years. The silence that followed Dane's departure wasn't the hollow emptiness I expected. Instead, it felt like the calm after a storm passes, not peaceful, but clear. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could think without the constant undercurrent of tension that had become our normal. I walked through each room of our house slowly, deliberately, seeing everything with new eyes. The Persian rug we'd bought on our honeymoon in Istanbul. The kitchen island where we used to eat breakfast together before his schedule became too demanding. The master bedroom where he'd been sleeping on his side of the bed like a stranger for the past 6 months, always checking his phone, always somewhere else mentally. It should have felt devastating. 8 years of marriage gone with the efficiency of a corporate termination. But what struck me most was how little had actually changed. Dane had been absent from our life long before tonight. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Morgan Victor, Henry's sister, and my closest friend since art school. "Coffee tomorrow? I have news about the gallery exhibition." I stared at the message, remembering Dane's casual dismissal of Henry as an obstacle that Lana was handling. Morgan had mentioned her brother's marriage had been strained lately, that his wife had been working late constantly, coming home distracted and secretive. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. I typed back, "Yes, and Morgan, there's something we need to discuss about your brother." Her response came immediately. "Henry's been expecting this conversation." That gave me pause. What exactly did Henry know? And more importantly, what had he been planning while Dane and Lana thought they were so clever? I set the phone down and continued my walk through the house. But now, I was seeing it differently. This wasn't a mausoleum of a failed marriage. It was my space,
free from the oppressive weight of someone who viewed everything I cared about as inadequate.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
In my studio, I stopped in front of the easel holding my latest piece, a landscape of the lake where Dane and I used to go hiking during our first year together. He dismissed it yesterday as more trees and water, rolling his eyes at what he called my hobby phase. Looking at it now, I saw something he never could, the way light transformed ordinary things into something extraordinary. The patience required to capture a single moment of beauty. The value of creating something meaningful rather than just profitable. My phone rang. Morgan. I know it's late, but I'm coming over. We need to talk. Morgan, it's past 10. Henry's here with me. We've been waiting for this day, honestly. Pack a bag. You're staying at my place tonight. The line went dead before I could protest. 20 minutes later, Morgan's Honda pulled into my driveway. She climbed out, all 5 feet 2 inches of controlled fury, her dark hair pulled back in the severe bun she wore when she meant business. Behind her, a tall man with graying temples and tired eyes followed, Henry Victor, whom I'd met perhaps 3 times at gallery openings and birthday parties. Emily, Morgan said, pulling me into a fierce hug, I'm so sorry, but I'm also relieved it's finally out in the open. Henry stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral, but his jaw tight. Mrs. Ashford, Emily, I think we have a lot to discuss. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. I've known for 3 months, he admitted. I hired a private investigator when Lana started working late every night, coming home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of something harder beneath it. Marcus Chen is very thorough. Morgan guided us into my living room, settling onto the couch like she was preparing for a war council. In a way, I suppose she was. Show her, she said to Henry. Henry pulled out a tablet, swiping through what appeared to be dozens of photographs. Dane and Lana at expensive restaurants. Dane and Lana entering the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where he claimed he'd be staying temporarily. Dane and Lana in what looked like a real estate office, examining property listings together. They've been planning this for months, Henry said quietly. The timing isn't coincidental. Dane made partner, Lana got promoted to senior associate, and suddenly they're positioning themselves as the firm's new power couple. Your marriage and mine were just inconveniences to be managed. I studied the photos, noting the casual intimacy between them, the way Lana's hand rested possessively on Dane's arm, the smug satisfaction in both their expressions. They looked like people who believed they'd figure out how to have everything they wanted without consequences. There's more, Morgan said softly. Henry, show her the financial records. More swiping revealed bank statements, credit card records, expense reports. Dane had been using our joint credit card to pay for their dinners, their hotel rooms, even what appeared to be jewelry purchases. Every romantic gesture, every intimate evening, funded by the marriage he was systematically destroying. My lawyer says this gives us significant leverage in divorce proceedings, Henry continued. The adultery, the financial impropriety, the professional ethics violations of partners conducting an affair that affects firm business. He shrugged. It's a comprehensive disaster for both of them, legally speaking. I should have felt vindicated. The evidence was overwhelming, the path to revenge clearly laid out. But something else was building in my chest. Not anger, but a cold sort of curiosity. What exactly are you planning? I asked. Henry and Morgan exchanged a look. That depends, Henry said carefully, on whether you want justice or just a settlement. I thought about Dane's dismissive gesture at my life, his casual cruelty, the months of lies and manipulation. I thought about Lana, who apparently saw destroying marriages as a strategic career move. I thought about how they'd planned to discard Henry and me like outdated business models. Tell me about justice, I said. Henry smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Marcus Chen doesn't just take photographs, he said. And Morrison Associates has very strict policies about partners who compromise the firm's reputation. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp, autumn clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I woke up in Morgan's guest room feeling more rested than I had in months, despite the circumstances. Or perhaps because of them. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood. Morgan had coffee ready when I emerged from the shower, along with what appeared to be a thick manila folder sitting on her kitchen table. "Henry dropped this off at 6 a.m., she said, sliding the folder toward me. "He's been busy." I opened it to find what could only be described as a comprehensive dossier. Marcus Chen, whoever he was, clearly believed in thoroughness. Beyond the photographs and financial records from last night, there were timeline charts, phone records, email headers, even parking garage timestamps showing when Dane and Lana had been meeting. But it was the last section that made my breath catch. Morrison Associates Employee Handbook, Section 12, Professional Conduct and Ethics Violations, I read aloud. The relevant passages were highlighted in yellow. Partners engaging in relationships that create conflicts of interest, compromise client confidentiality, or damage the firm's reputation may face disciplinary action up to and including termination and forfeiture of partnership equity. "Keep reading," Morgan said, settling into the chair across from me with her own coffee. The next document was a client list, specifically clients whose cases had been handled jointly by Dane and Lana over the past 3 months. 12 major corporate accounts, including 3 Fortune 500 companies with strict moral clauses in their legal service contracts. "Corporate clients don't like their lawyers making headlines for the wrong reasons," Morgan explained. "Henry's been researching this for weeks. Apparently, Morrison Associates is already on thin ice with Hartwell Industries after some billing irregularities last year. One scandal involving partners could cost them their biggest accounts." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to meet. Today. It's urgent. D." I showed the message to Morgan, who rolled her eyes. "Let me guess. Now that you've had a night to think about it, he's realizing he moved too fast." Another text arrived. "Lana thinks we should talk before lawyers get involved. Meet me at Riverside Cafe at noon." "Lana thinks," Morgan repeated flatly. "So now his mistress is making decisions about your divorce proceedings." A third message. "Emily, I know you're upset, but let's handle this maturely. We can work out an arrangement that benefits everyone." I stared at that last text, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. An arrangement that benefits everyone? The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He wanted to manage me, just like he was apparently managing Henry, reduce us to obstacles that could be handled with the right strategy. "I think I should go," I said. Morgan looked at me like I'd suggested jumping off a bridge. No. That's exactly what they want, to control the narrative, make you feel like you have to negotiate for basic respect. "That's exactly why I should go," I said, already reaching for my phone. Let them think they're still in control. I typed back, "Fine, noon at Riverside, but this is the last conversation we're having without lawyers present." His response was immediate. "Thank you. You won't regret this." I almost laughed. I wouldn't regret it, but probably not for the reasons he imagined. At 11:45, I sat in my car outside Riverside Cafe, watching through the windows as Dane and Lana claimed a corner table. Even from a distance, their body language told a story of 2 people who believed they were about to solve a problem. Lana kept checking her phone and gesturing animatedly. Dane nodded along, occasionally glancing toward the parking lot to watch for my arrival. They looked like executives preparing for a negotiation they were confident they'd win. I walked in at exactly noon, noting how they'd positioned themselves. Dane facing the door, Lana with her back to the wall, both with clear sightlines to exits. Even their seating arrangement was strategic. "Emily," Dane stood as I approached, extending his hand toward the empty chair they'd positioned across from them. "Thank you for coming." Lana offered what I supposed was meant to be a sympathetic smile. Up close, she was exactly what I'd expected. Polished, professional, beautiful in the calculated way of someone who understood that appearance was a business tool. Her dark hair was styled in a perfect bob, her makeup flawless, her navy suit clearly expensive. She looked like someone who belonged in Dane's world of conference rooms and client presentations. "I'm Lana," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you." The sheer nerve of introducing herself as if we were meeting at a networking event almost left me speechless. She was sitting across from the wife of the man she'd been sleeping with, about to discuss the destruction of my marriage, and she was treating it like a business lunch. "I'm sure you have," I said, taking the offered seat but ignoring her hand. "Look, Emily," Dane began, settling back into what I recognized as his client management voice. Reasonable, slightly patronizing, designed to make the listener feel like any disagreement would be unreasonable. "I know last night was abrupt, but Lana and I have been talking, and we think there's a way to handle this that minimizes pain for everyone involved." "Minimizes pain," I repeated. "What Dane means," Lana said, leaning forward slightly, "is that we're all adults here. We all want to move forward with our lives, and getting bogged down in a messy, public divorce helps no one." I studied her face, noting the confidence there, the assumption that she could manage this situation just like any other business problem. She had no idea what was coming. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Dane pulled out a folder, apparently everyone had folders now, and slid it across the table. "A settlement offer. The house, obviously, would need to be sold, but your share would be substantial, plus alimony for 3 years, which should give you time to establish yourself professionally." Establish myself professionally, as if my art career was a hobby I'd been indulging in until I could find real work. "And in exchange?" I asked, though I already knew. "A clean, no-fault divorce," Lana said smoothly. "No dragging the firm into personal matters, no unnecessary complications." Henry has already agreed to similar terms, so really this could all be resolved very quickly and privately. I looked at both of them, these two people who had systematically destroyed 2 marriages and were now trying to buy their way out of consequences. "That's interesting," I said, "because Henry gave me a very different impression last night." The silence that followed my words was delicious. I watched as uncertainty flickered across both their faces, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of control they'd walked in with. Lana's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, while Dane's confident smile faltered just enough to reveal the calculation beneath it. "What do you mean?" Lana asked, her voice still smooth but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. I leaned back in my chair, studying them both with the kind of detached interest I usually reserved for a particularly complex painting. It was fascinating how quickly their dynamics shift when they realized they might not have all the information they thought they did. "Henry's been very thorough in his research," I said, letting each word settle in the space between us. "Much more thorough than either of you seem to realize." Dane's jaw tightened. "Emily, whatever Henry told you, he's obviously hurt and not thinking clearly. Men in his position often make threats they can't follow through on." "Men in his position," I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "You mean men whose wives are sleeping with their business partners? Men who've been systematically lied to and financially defrauded? Those men?" Financial fraud is a strong accusation, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Joint credit cards in a marriage aren't. "I'm not talking about our marriage," I interrupted gently. "I'm talking about Hardwell Industries and Meridian Corp. And that lovely dinner you two had at Les Bernard last month, the one Dane expensed to the Peterson account." The color drained from both their faces. It was remarkable how quickly corporate confidence could evaporate when specific client names were mentioned. "That's," Dane started, then stopped, clearly reconsidering whatever explanation he'd been about to offer. "Billing irregularities," I continued, borrowing Henry's phrase, "especially when they involve partners using client expense accounts to fund their personal relationships. Morrison Associates already has concerns about financial oversight, doesn't it? Something about a previous incident with Hartwell Industries?" Lana's coffee cup clinked against its saucer as she set it down too quickly. "How could you possibly know about internal firm matters?" "Henry has been very busy over the past 3 months," I said, enjoying the way they both leaned forward slightly, hanging on my words. When someone systematically destroys your life, it's amazing how motivated you become to understand exactly how they did it. Dane cleared his throat, switching tactics. Look, Emily, even if there were some technical irregularities in expense reporting, that's easily corrected. A simple reimbursement to the firm, maybe a minor reprimand. Is that what you think this is? I asked, genuinely curious. What else would it be? Lana demanded, her composure finally beginning to crack. We're talking about dinner receipts, not embezzlement. I almost felt sorry for them. They were still thinking like people who believed the rules applied differently to them, that their positions at the firm made them untouchable. They had no idea what was coming. You're right, I said, standing up slowly. It's not embezzlement. It's a pattern of ethical violations, professional misconduct, and breach of fiduciary duty. But you'll hear all about that from Morrison himself. I believe he's scheduled to meet with both of you tomorrow morning. The blood drained from Dane's face so quickly I thought he might faint. What are you talking about? Richard Morrison, your boss, the founding partner of the firm where you've both built your careers. I gathered my purse, taking my time. Henry sent him a very comprehensive report this morning, along with copies to the State Bar Association, Hartwell Industries Legal Department, and several other interested parties. Lana shot to her feet. You can't do that. Those are privileged. Attorney-client privilege doesn't cover billing fraud, I said pleasantly, and it certainly doesn't cover using client accounts to fund personal relationships that violate firm policy. Emily, wait. Dane's voice cracked slightly. Let's talk about this rationally. Whatever Henry thinks he knows. He doesn't think he knows anything, I interrupted. He knows exactly what you've both been doing. The question is whether you understand what you've done. I started walking toward the exit, then paused and turned back. Both of them were staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. Raw panic mixed with the dawning realization that they were no longer in control of the situation. Oh, and Lana? I said, my voice carrying clearly across the cafe. Your husband sends his regards. He's very much looking forward to seeing you at home tonight. I left them sitting there, probably for the first time in months, with nothing to say to each other. Through the cafe windows, I could see them leaning across the table in urgent conversation, Lana's earlier poise completely abandoned, Dane running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized as his panic response. My phone buzzed as I reached my car, a text from Henry. How did they take the news? I typed back, about as well as you'd expect. Morrison really meeting with them tomorrow? 9 a.m. sharp. Marcus delivered the report personally this morning. I thought you should have the pleasure. I sat in my car for a moment, watching through the cafe windows as my husband and his mistress continued their frantic discussion. 12 hours ago, they had been confident predators dismantling obstacles to their perfect life. Now, they looked like what they really were, two people who had made catastrophically bad decisions and were just beginning to understand the consequences. But this was only the beginning. What they didn't know yet was that Henry's report hadn't just gone to Morrison Associates. It had gone to everyone who needed to see it. And in the world of corporate law, reputation was everything. By tomorrow morning, their carefully constructed professional lives would begin unraveling in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. I started my car and drove away, leaving them to figure out exactly how much trouble they were really in. They'd find out soon enough. The drive back to my house felt surreal, like traveling through a landscape that looked familiar but had somehow shifted overnight. Everything appeared the same. The tree-lined streets of our subdivision, the perfectly manicured lawns, the oversized houses that Dane had insisted we needed to maintain our professional image. But I was seeing it all through different eyes. I pulled into the driveway of what was no longer our house, but simply the place where I lived, and sat for a moment in the afternoon silence. The BMW was gone, of course. Dane had taken it to his meeting with Lana, probably assuming they'd drive away with a neat solution to their inconvenient spouses. I wondered if they were still sitting in that cafe, frantically making phone calls, or if they'd already rushed back to Morrison and Associates to do damage control. Inside, the house felt different too. Not empty, Dane had barely been present here for months anyway, but cleaner somehow, unburdened. I walked through the rooms slowly, no longer seeing them as spaces we had shared, but as places that were entirely mine to do with as I pleased. In the kitchen, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the granite island where Dane had delivered his rehearsed breakup speech less than 24 hours ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. The woman who had stood there, gripping the countertop while her husband casually destroyed their marriage, felt like someone I barely recognized. My phone rang. Henry. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. "Better than I expected," I said, and realized I meant it. "How are you?" A long pause. "I've been thinking about that. 3 months ago, when I first suspected something was wrong, I thought discovering the truth would be the hardest part. But it turns out the hardest part was continuing to live with someone who was systematically destroying our life while pretending to care about me." I understood exactly what he meant. The lies, the manipulation, the gradual erosion of trust, all of it was worse than the actual betrayal. At least now we knew where we stood. "Lana came home early," Henry continued, "about an hour ago. She's been on the phone in her office ever since, speaking in the kind of whisper that means crisis management. Are you okay being there with her?" Actually, yes. For the first time in months, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. There's something liberating about not having to pretend anymore. I knew that feeling. The exhausting performance of trying to save a marriage with someone who had already decided to end it, the constant second guessing of your own instincts when they told you something was wrong, all of that was finally over. What happens next? Tomorrow morning, Morrison meets with them. Marcus thinks the firm will want to handle this quietly, maybe forced resignations instead of termination, to avoid the publicity of firing two partners for ethics violations. But either way, their careers at Morrison Associates are over. I tried to imagine Dane's reaction when he realized that his carefully planned ascension to law firm royalty had been demolished in a single day. All those 70-hour weeks, all that networking and strategic positioning, destroyed because he couldn't resist the temptation to use client accounts to fund his affair. And after that? The state bar investigation will take months, but the evidence is solid. Best case scenario for them, they'll face suspension and professional censure. Worst case? Henry's voice trailed off. Well, billing fraud can be a criminal matter, depending on the amounts involved. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had been discarded like outdated business models, now watching their former spouses face the consequences of their choices. "Henry," I said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When did you decide to fight back? Was there a specific moment when you knew you weren't going to just accept this quietly?" Another pause. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "It was about 6 weeks ago. Lana came home from one of her late work sessions and found me making dinner. She looked at me, standing there in our kitchen, cooking for both of us like I had every night for 12 years, and she actually seemed annoyed, like my continued existence in her life was an inconvenience she was tired of managing." I closed my eyes, remembering Dane's dismissive gesture at our life together, his casual reference to me as something to be handled maturely. "That's when I realized they don't see us as people," Henry continued. "We're just problems to be solved, obstacles to be removed so they can have the life they think they deserve. And I decided that if I was going to be treated like an obstacle, I might as well be an effective one." "An effective obstacle," I repeated, liking the phrase. "Exactly. Tomorrow, they'll discover just how effective we can be." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the afternoon light shift across the granite countertops that Dane had chosen because they looked executive. Everything in this house had been selected for image, for the impression it would make on clients and colleagues. Even our marriage had become part of his professional brand, the successful partner with the artistic wife, the perfect balance of ambition and creativity. But I wasn't part of anyone's brand anymore. I was just Emily Ashford, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. My phone buzzed with another text from Dane. We need to talk, tonight. This has gone too far. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. He'd had his chance to talk. Now it was time for him to listen. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I painted. Not the careful, commercial landscapes that sold well at local galleries, but something raw and immediate. I set up my easel in the living room, directly in front of the massive windows that Dane had installed to showcase our lifestyle, and began working on a canvas with bold, sweeping strokes. The painting emerged without conscious planning, a storm clearing over dark water, revealing brilliant sky beyond. I lost myself in the rhythm of it, the physical act of creation replacing the mental gymnastics I'd been performing for months, trying to save a marriage that was already dead. I was still painting when headlights swept across the windows. A car door slammed, followed by the aggressive beeping of someone punching the security code wrong multiple times. The front door burst open, and Dane stormed in with the kind of barely contained fury I'd only seen him display during depositions with hostile witnesses. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, still in his expensive suit but with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. Behind him, Lana hovered in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was invited inside. I didn't stop painting. I'm working on a new piece. Storm clearing, if you're interested in the artistic interpretation. Don't be cute, Emily. You know exactly what I'm talking about. He gestured wildly toward me, nearly knocking over a side table. That meeting with Morrison is career suicide for both of us. You need to call Henry right now and tell him to withdraw that report. Why would I do that? I asked, adding another stroke of brilliant yellow to represent sunlight breaking through clouds. Because this is insane. Lana stepped forward, her earlier poise completely abandoned. Her perfect hair was messed from running her hands through it, and her makeup showed stress lines I hadn't noticed at lunch. You're destroying 4 lives over a relationship that could have been handled privately. I finally turned from my easel to look at her directly. 4 lives? Yours, mine, Dane's, Henry's, she counted off on her fingers. If this goes public, if Morrison Associates fires us both, everyone loses. Your alimony disappears, Henry's lifestyle disappears, our careers are over. My lifestyle, I interrupted, never depended on your career. And Henry has his own business, which I suspect you'd know if you'd ever bothered to ask him about it. Confusion flickered across her face. Apparently, in all her strategic planning, she'd never actually researched what her husband did for a living. Henry owns 3 auto body shops and 2 commercial properties, I continued, returning to my painting. He's quite successful, actually. Self-made, unlike those of us who built our lives around law firm partnerships. Dane's face was turning an alarming shade of red. Emily, stop this nonsense and listen to me. I know you're hurt, but think rationally. If you destroy my career, you destroy your own financial security. My financial security, I said, mixing blue and white on my palette, is fine. I've been keeping separate accounts for 2 years, ever since you started criticizing every purchase I made as frivolous artistic expenses. That wasn't entirely true. I had some savings, but nothing close to the lifestyle we'd been living. But watching his expression shift from anger to uncertainty was worth the bluff. You can't be serious about going through with this, Lana said, her voice taking on a pleading edge. Morrison already suspended us both pending investigation. Do you understand what that means? We can't work on cases. We can't bill clients. You can't use client accounts to pay for romantic dinners, I finished. Yes, I imagine that would be inconvenient. Dane stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought he might actually grab the paintbrush from my hand. This stops now. You call Henry, you both withdraw your complaints, and we handle this like adults. I'll give you the house, full ownership, plus reasonable alimony. Lana and I will transfer to the Chicago office, start fresh there. Start fresh? I repeated, still painting. Interesting phrase. What does Henry get in this arrangement? A wife who's proven she'll abandon him the moment something better comes along? Henry gets to avoid a public scandal, Lana snapped, just like you do. Or would you prefer to have your private life dissected in legal proceedings and local newspapers? I set down my brush and turned to face them both fully. They looked desperate now, all their careful planning reduced to begging in my living room while I painted in clothes that cost less than Lana's shoes. You know what I find fascinating? I said. 3 months ago, if you'd simply asked for divorces like honest people, we probably would have agreed. Henry suspected you were having an affair anyway, and I knew our marriage was over. We might have been hurt, but we would have survived. Then why? Dane started. Because you didn't want just divorces, I continued. You wanted to keep your respectable marriages while having your exciting affair. You wanted Henry and me to be convenient cover stories while you played out your corporate romance fantasy. You wanted to use us. Lana's professional mask slipped completely. So what? This is revenge? You're going to destroy everything because your feelings got hurt? I smiled, picking up my brush again. This isn't revenge, Lana. Revenge would be personal, emotional, about making you pay for hurting me. I added another stroke of brilliant gold to the emerging sun in my painting. This is consequences. And consequences aren't about feelings, they're about choices. Dane's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and went pale. Morrison wants to see us at 8 a.m. tomorrow instead of 9, emergency meeting. Then you should probably get some rest, I said pleasantly. Tomorrow's going to be a very long day. The next morning, I woke to silence. No hurried shower sounds, no coffee maker grinding, no urgent phone calls about client emergencies. For the first time in 8 years, I had the luxury of beginning my day without accommodating someone else's schedule. I made myself breakfast, real breakfast, not the quick coffee and toast I usually grabbed while Dane rattled off his daily meetings, and settled at the kitchen table with my laptop. If Henry could research our spouse's professional destruction, I could certainly educate myself about what came next. The Morrison Associates website painted the picture of a prestigious firm built on integrity, excellence, and client service. Their partners page featured glamorous headshots and impressive credentials. Dane's photo smiled confidently from the corporate law section, while Lana's appeared under senior associates. By tomorrow, I suspected both photos would be quietly removed. I dug deeper, researching the firm's history, their major clients, the professional standards they claim to uphold. What I found was fascinating. Morrison Associates had built their reputation on representing conservative, family-owned corporations, exactly the kind of clients who wouldn't tolerate partners engaging in public scandals. My phone buzzed with a text from Morgan. Coffee in an hour. Henry has updates. We met at a small cafe downtown, far from the corporate district where Dane and Lana were presumably facing their professional reckoning. Henry looked better than I'd expected. Tired, but with the focused energy of someone who'd been working toward a specific goal for months. How did it go? I asked, as he slid into the booth across from Morgan and me. Better than expected, he said, pulling out his phone. Marcus has contacts everywhere, including someone who works in Morrison's building. The meeting started at 8 a.m. sharp. He showed us a series of text messages from his investigator. Both arrived separately. Ashford 7:45, Hench 7:50. Neither spoke to each other in lobby. Security escorted them to conference room, not Morrison's office. Bad sign. Morrison brought 2 other partners and legal counsel. Very bad sign. Legal counsel? Morgan raised an eyebrow. The firm's protecting itself, Henry explained. When partners violate ethics rules, especially involving client accounts, the firm becomes liable. They need their own lawyers to document how they're handling the situation. Another message appeared. Both left separately through parking garage. Ashford looked shell-shocked. Hench was crying. I tried to picture Lana, polished, controlled Lana, crying in a parking garage. The image felt almost surreal. So they're fired? I asked. Suspended indefinitely, pending investigation, Henry corrected, which in corporate speak means fired, but with legal paperwork that protects the firm from wrongful termination lawsuits. My phone rang. Dane's number. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker. Emily, we need to talk immediately. This situation is. We need to discuss our options. Call me back as soon as you get this. His voice was strained, lacking the confident authority I'd grown accustomed to over 8 years. He sounded like a man who just watched his carefully constructed world collapse. "Listen to this one," Henry said, playing a voicemail from Lana. Her voice was barely recognizable, high, panicked, desperate. "Henry, please, you have to call me back. They're talking about criminal charges. Criminal charges, Henry. We need to fix this before it goes any further. Please, just call me. We can work this out." Criminal charges. The words hung in the air between us. "Marcus pulled the detailed expense reports," Henry continued. "It's not just dinner receipts. There's a weekend trip to Napa Valley billed to the Hartwell account, jewelry purchases charged to 3 different client accounts, even what appears to be a down payment on an apartment that was expensed as client development." Morgan whistled low. "How much total?" "Just over $47,000 across 6 months. Henry's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see the anger underneath. $47,000 of other people's money to fund their relationship while they lied to us every single day. I thought about Dane's casual dismissal of my art as frivolous expenses while he was spending nearly $50,000 on his affair. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "What happens next?" I asked. "The State Bar Association opens their investigation tomorrow. Morrison Associates will cooperate fully, they have to protect their reputation. And Marcus thinks the district attorney's office might get involved if the amounts are high enough." "District attorney," I repeated. "White-collar crime unit. Billing fraud involving client accounts crosses into criminal territory when the amounts are this substantial." Henry's phone buzzed with another message, "especially when it involves attorneys who should know better." He read the new text aloud. "Both back at firm, cleaning out offices under security supervision. Word is spreading fast." I imagined Dane packing his diplomas and awards while security guards watched, his colleagues whispering in hallways about what he'd done. The professional reputation he'd spent 15 years building, destroyed in a single morning. "There's something else," Henry said quietly. "Marcus discovered they were planning to leave Morrison Associates anyway. They had interviews scheduled with firms in Chicago and San Francisco. This whole thing, the affair, the financial impropriety, it was their exit strategy." "Exit strategy?" Morgan asked. "They were going to cash out their partnership equity, take high-paying positions elsewhere, and start fresh in a new city, away from us, away from any consequences." Henry's jaw tightened. "We weren't just obstacles to their relationship, we were obstacles to their entire life plan." The depth of their betrayal was staggering. They hadn't just destroyed our marriages, they'd been systematically planning to abandon everything and everyone in their current lives, including the firm that had made their careers possible. "Well," I said finally, "I suppose they're still getting their fresh start, just not the kind they planned." Henry smiled grimly. "Marcus estimates they'll be unemployable at any major firm by the end of the week. Word travels fast in legal circles, especially when it involves ethics violations." My phone buzzed again, another call from Dane. I declined it and looked at my 2 allies, Henry, who'd spent months carefully documenting every detail of our spouse's betrayal, and Morgan, who'd supported us both through this revelation. "So what now?" I asked. "Now," Henry said, "we wait and watch while they discover exactly what consequences look like." By afternoon, the full scope of Dane and Lana's situation was becoming clear. Marcus Chen had outdone himself. His network of contacts throughout the legal community was providing real-time updates on how quickly word was spreading about Morrison Associates' ethics situation. I was back at my easel, adding details to yesterday's storm painting, when Henry called with the most significant update yet. "The Hartwell Industries legal department received copies of all the fraudulent billing this morning," he said without preamble. "Their general counsel is furious. Apparently, they've been questioning some of Morrison's charges for months, and this confirms their suspicions about the firm's billing practices." I set down my brush. "What does that mean?" It means Hartwell is pulling their account, effective immediately, and they're considering whether to pursue their own criminal complaint for fraud. The magnitude hit me immediately. Hartwell Industries wasn't just any client. They were Morrison Associates' largest account, responsible for nearly 30% of the firm's annual revenue. Losing them wouldn't just hurt the firm, it would devastate it. How many people work at Morrison Associates? I asked. About 60 attorneys, plus staff. Marcus estimates they'll have to let go at least 20 people to absorb the loss of the Hartwell account. 20 families whose livelihoods would be affected because Dane and Lana couldn't keep their hands out of client expense accounts. The ripple effects of their selfishness were expanding far beyond what any of us had imagined. My phone rang. Dane again. This time I answered. "Emily, thank God." His voice was breathless, desperate. "We need to meet, right now. I'll explain everything." "There's nothing to explain," I said calmly. "I understand the situation perfectly."
No, you don't. This is bigger than us now. Morrison is talking about suing us for restitution. Hartwell is threatening criminal charges. The state bar wants to interview me tomorrow. His words tumbled over each other. If this goes public, if criminal charges are filed, it destroys everything. Not just my career, yours too. Your reputation, your art business, everything. My art business, I repeated slowly, has nothing to do with your billing fraud. People will talk, Emily. In a community this size, scandals spread. Clients won't want to buy from the ex-wife of a disgraced attorney. You'll be guilt by association. I almost laughed. Even facing professional and potentially criminal ruin, he was still trying to manipulate me with fear. Dane, let me explain something to you. My clients buy my paintings because they're beautiful, not because I'm married to a lawyer. In fact, I suspect some of them will find me more interesting as the ex-wife of a disgraced attorney than they ever did as the wife of a successful one. "This isn't a joke," he shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. "They're talking about felony charges. Do you understand what that means? Prison time, Emily. Actual prison." For the first time since this began, I felt something other than cold satisfaction. Not sympathy for him, that ship had sailed, but recognition of how thoroughly he'd destroyed himself. "How much did you steal, Dane?" "It wasn't stealing, it was expense account irregularities." "How much?" A long pause. "The total they're claiming is just over $47,000, but that includes interest and penalties they're calculating." $47,000. I let the number hang in the air. "To pay for your affair with Lana while lying to me every single day for 6 months. Emily, please, I know I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" I interrupted. "You think this was mistakes? What would you call it?" "Choices," I said quietly. "You chose to have an affair. You chose to use client money to fund it. You chose to lie to me, to Henry, to your partners, to your clients. Every single day for months, you made the choice to continue." "I can fix this," he said desperately. "I can pay back every penny. We can work out a settlement with Morrison. I can—" "With what money?" I asked. "You're unemployed, Dane. Unemployable. Who's going to loan money to a disbarred attorney facing felony fraud charges?" The silence on the other end told me he hadn't thought that far ahead. In all his strategic planning, he'd never considered what happened if he got caught. "Lana has some savings," he said finally, his voice small. "Lana's in the same situation you are, and something tells me her loyalty to you might not survive financial ruin and criminal charges." As if summoned by our conversation, call waiting beeped. Lana's number. "Actually, Dane, why don't you ask her yourself? She's calling right now." I clicked over. "Hello, Lana." "Emily, please, you have to help us. No preamble, no pretense, just raw panic. They're saying we might go to prison. Prison, Emily, for expense account mistakes." "I keep hearing about these mistakes," I said. "Funny how they always involved luxury restaurants and jewelry stores." "We can pay it back, every penny, with interest. Henry has money, you could loan us." "You want me to ask Henry to loan you money to pay back what you stole while you were destroying his marriage?" "It's not about what we want anymore," she said, her voice breaking.
It's about survival. If criminal charges are filed, we lose everything. Our licenses, our careers, our freedom. Your freedom was never in question, I said. You could have asked for divorces like honest people. You chose deception and fraud instead. You don't understand the pressure we were under, the firm, the expectations, the stress of hiding our relationship. The stress of hiding, I repeated. You mean the stress of lying. Please, she whispered, I'm begging you. Call the prosecutors, tell them we'll make full restitution, ask them not to file charges. You and Henry are the victims here. They'll listen to you. I looked at my painting, the storm clouds parting to reveal brilliant sunshine. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Lana, I want you to understand something very clearly. You and Dane created this situation. Every choice that led to this moment was yours. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. But if you I'm not going to save you from yourselves, I said. That's not my job anymore. I hung up and immediately called Henry. They're panicking, I told him, both of them. Dane's talking about prison time, Lana's begging us to intervene with prosecutors. Good, Henry said simply, because Marcus just found out there's more. They weren't just stealing from client accounts, they were skimming from the firm's charitable foundation. The blood drained from my face. How much more? Another $15,000 for a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard that was supposedly a legal education conference. Over $60,000. My husband and his mistress had stolen over $60,000 to fund their affair. Henry, I said slowly, I think we're about to watch them destroy each other. The self-destruction began faster than either Henry or I had anticipated. By the next morning, Marcus Chen was forwarding us text message screenshots that painted a picture of two peoples whose alliance was crumbling under pressure. The first crack appeared around midnight. Marcus had somehow obtained access to their communication. Legally, he assured us, through sources he couldn't name. The messages told a story of blame, desperation, and rapidly dissolving loyalty. Lana to Dane, 12:17 a.m. This is your fault. You said the expense accounts were fine, but everyone did it. Dane to Lana, 12:23 a.m. My fault? You're the one who insisted on Martha's Vineyard. I wanted to keep it simple.
Lana, 12:24 a.m. Simple? You charged a $3,000 necklace to the Peterson account and called it client entertainment. Dane, 12:31 a.m. That was a gift for you. You loved it when I gave it to you. Lana, 12:33 a.m. I loved it when I thought you bought it with your money, not stolen client funds. I sat in my kitchen reading these exchanges over coffee, watching two people who had destroyed their marriages for each other now tearing each other apart. There was something almost poetic about it. The best part, Henry said over the phone, is that they're both talking to lawyers now, separate lawyers. Separate lawyers? Criminal defense attorneys. Marcus says the word around town is that they're pointing fingers at each other, each trying to minimize their own culpability. That afternoon brought even more dramatic developments. Morgan called with news that spread through our social circle like wildfire. Dane had been seen at his bank, apparently trying to liquidate assets. The effort had been unsuccessful. Most of their joint accounts had been frozen pending the investigation. He looked terrible, Morgan reported. Sarah from the gallery saw him at First National. She said he was arguing with the bank manager about accessing his safety deposit box. What's in the safety deposit box? Nobody knows, but the bank won't let him access it without a court order. Apparently, the FBI issued a preservation notice on all their assets yesterday. FBI. The letters sent a chill through me, even though I knew I had nothing to fear. Dane's world was expanding from professional embarrassment to federal investigation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Lana's attorney. We need to speak regarding your husband's criminal exposure. Can you meet today? I showed the message to Henry when he arrived at my house an hour later. Don't respond, he advised immediately. They're fishing for information, trying to see if you know anything that could help their case against Dane. Their case against Dane?
Marcus heard from his courthouse contacts that Lana's lawyer is negotiating a plea agreement. She's offering to testify against Dane in exchange for reduced charges. The irony was breathtaking. 6 months ago, these two had been planning their perfect life together. Now, Lana was preparing to throw Dane under the bus to save herself. What about Dane? Is he doing the same thing? That's where it gets interesting. Henry pulled out his phone and showed me a news article from the legal trade publication. Read this. The headline made my stomach drop. Morrison Associates partner alleges coercion by senior associate in billing fraud scheme. I read the article twice before the full meaning sank in. Dane was claiming that Lana had pressured him into the fraudulent billing, that she had threatened to end their relationship if he didn't find ways to fund their lifestyle. He was painting himself as the victim of a manipulative woman who had led him astray. He's really going to try to blame her for everything? Looks like it. His lawyer issued a statement saying Dane was emotionally compromised by an exploitative relationship and misled about the legality of certain expense procedures. I almost felt sorry for Lana. Almost. She had destroyed her marriage and helped destroy mine. But watching Dane systematically betray her the same way he'd betrayed me was still ugly to witness. So they're both trying to destroy each other to save themselves? Exactly. And from what Marcus is hearing, the prosecutors are happy to let them. 2 defendants pointing fingers at each other makes the government's case much easier. That evening, the dam burst completely. Morgan forwarded me a screenshot from a mutual friend who had witnessed an epic confrontation at the downtown Starbucks where Dane and Lana apparently met to coordinate their legal strategy. The meeting had ended with Lana throwing her coffee at Dane and screaming loud enough for the entire cafe to hear, "You lying, cowardly bastard! I would never have done any of this without you!" Dane's response, according to witnesses, was to calmly wipe coffee off his shirt and say, "Then you should have thought of that before you demanded I prove my love with expensive gifts." By the time security arrived, they were both gone, but not before providing entertainment for dozens of downtown professionals who had undoubtedly spread the story throughout the business community within hours. "This is better than reality TV," Morgan commented when she called to discuss the incident. "It's tragic," I said, though I had to admit there was a certain satisfaction in watching 2 people who had been so confident in their cleverness now publicly humiliating themselves. Tragic for who? They chose this path. They chose deception, theft, betrayal, and now they're choosing to destroy each other rather than take responsibility. She was right. Every step of this disaster had been their choice. The affair, the theft, the lies, and now the mutual destruction. All of it stemmed from their original decision that what they wanted mattered more than the people they were hurting. Henry called that night with the final piece of news that confirmed how completely their alliance had shattered. Lana moved out of their hotel suite, he reported. She's staying with her sister now. And Marcus says Dane tried to access her laptop, probably looking for evidence he could use against her. Did he find anything? That's the beautiful part. She had already given the laptop to her lawyer. But the attempt to access it is being reported to the prosecutors as potential evidence tampering. I hung up and sat in my quiet house, surrounded by the peace that had replaced the constant tension of living with someone who was systematically betraying me. Outside, life continued normally. Neighbors walking dogs, teenagers skateboarding, families enjoying the evening air. Inside my house, I was learning what justice actually looked like. Not the dramatic courtroom victory I might have imagined, but something quieter and more complete, watching 2 people destroy themselves and each other through their own choices, while I remained safely outside the blast radius they had created. Tomorrow, I knew, would bring more revelations, more consequences, more evidence of how thoroughly Dane and Lana had miscalculated the cost of their actions. I returned to my easel and added more gold to the sunshine breaking through the storm clouds in my painting. The metaphor was becoming more literal by the day. The financial reckoning arrived with the brutal efficiency that only the legal system can deliver. Henry called early Thursday morning with news that Marcus had been tracking through his courthouse contacts. The federal prosecutors had filed formal charges. Wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy, Henry reported. Both of them. The indictments were unsealed an hour ago. I set down my coffee, feeling the weight of those words. Whatever else happened, Dane and Lana were now officially federal defendants. Their names would be in court records, newspaper databases, and background checks for the rest of their lives. What does that mean in practical terms? It means they're both looking at potential prison sentences of up to 20 years, though Marcus thinks they'll probably plea bargain down to much less. More immediately, it means they're both effectively unemployable in any legal capacity. 20 years. Even with plea bargains, even with cooperation and restitution, their careers were over. The law licenses they had spent years earning, the partnerships they had worked decades to achieve, the professional reputations they had carefully cultivated, all of it gone. There's more, Henry continued. The State Bar Association issued emergency suspension orders this morning. Effective immediately, neither of them can practice law anywhere in the state pending resolution of the criminal charges. I thought about Dane's expensive law school diplomas hanging in his home office, the bar admission certificate he'd been so proud of, the partnership plaque from Morrison Associates that had represented the pinnacle of his career ambitions. All of it reduced to expensive wallpaper. But the personal destruction was only part of the story. By midday, the professional consequences were rippling outward in ways that made my stomach turn. Morgan called with an update that put the broader damage into perspective. Morrison Associates just announced they're laying off 32 people, she said without preamble. 32 families losing their jobs because of what Dane and Lana did. The number hit me like a physical blow. Secretaries, paralegals, junior attorneys, support staff, people who had nothing to do with the billing fraud, but who were paying the price for it anyway. How can 32 people lose their jobs over this? It's not just the money they stole, Morgan explained. It's the clients leaving. Hartwell Industries was just the beginning. 3 more major accounts have terminated their relationships with Morrison, citing concerns about financial oversight and ethical standards. 3 more? Marcus says it's going to get worse. Corporate clients don't want to be associated with a firm that made headlines for billing fraud. Even the clients who aren't terminating immediately are demanding fee reductions and enhanced oversight. I found myself thinking about people I'd never met, the receptionist who might lose her health insurance, the paralegal who might not be able to make his mortgage payment, the associate who had just started building his career. All of them casualties of Dane and Lana's selfish choices. There's something else, Morgan continued. The charity foundation they stole from? It's a children's cancer research fund. My blood went cold. They stole from a cancer charity? $15,000 that was supposed to fund research grants for pediatric oncology. The foundation's board is meeting tomorrow to decide whether to file their own criminal complaint. I had to sit down. Even knowing everything I knew about Dane's capacity for selfishness, this felt like a new low. Stealing client funds was criminal, but stealing from children with cancer felt like something darker entirely. My phone buzzed with yet another call from Dane. I answered this time, curious to hear how he would try to spin federal fraud charges and charity theft. "Emily, please, you have to listen to me." His voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, desperate, stripped of any pretense of control. They're trying to make me the scapegoat for everything. Lana's lawyer is painting me as the mastermind while she was just following orders. Were you the mastermind? It wasn't like that. We were both involved. We both made decisions together. But now she's claiming I pressured her, that she was afraid to refuse when I suggested using client accounts. Did you pressure her? A long pause. I suggested some of the financial arrangements, but she was enthusiastic about the benefits. She loved the expensive restaurants, the jewelry, the weekend trips. She never objected to any of it. So you're both guilty. That's not Emily. You don't understand. Her lawyer is offering a cooperation deal. She's going to testify that I masterminded everything, that she was just a victim of my manipulation. They're going to paint me as a predator who took advantage of a vulnerable woman.
The irony was almost too much to bear. Lana Hench, ambitious, calculating, ruthless Lana, being painted as a vulnerable victim. But criminal defense was about strategy, not truth, and apparently her strategy was to sacrifice Dane completely. "What do you want from me, Dane?" "I need you to tell them the truth about her, about how aggressive she was in pursuing our relationship, how she pushed for the expensive lifestyle. You saw how she behaved at that cafe. She's not some innocent victim." "You want me to testify against your mistress to help defend you in your criminal trial?" "I want you to tell the truth. She's not the person she's pretending to be. She's calculating, manipulative." "She's exactly the person you chose over me," I interrupted. "The person you destroyed our marriage for. And now you want me to help you destroy her too?" Silence on the other end. "Dane, let me explain something to you very clearly. What happens between you and Lana in court is not my problem. You two can tear each other apart all you want, but I'm not going to be part of it." "But if you don't help, if you let her paint me as the mastermind, then you'll face the consequences of your own actions, just like she will, just like everyone does eventually." I hung up and immediately called Henry to warn him that he might receive a similar request. "Already got it," he said grimly. "Lana's lawyer called an hour ago. They want me to provide character testimony about how controlling and manipulative Dane was, how Lana was just trying to please him." "Are you going to do it?" "Absolutely not. Let them destroy each other without our help." That evening, Marcus sent us the final piece of information that completed the picture of their professional annihilation. Both Morrison and Associates and the 3 departing clients had filed civil lawsuits seeking restitution and damages. The total exposure was approaching $500,000, money that neither Dane nor Lana had, especially since their assets were frozen. "They're going to be financially ruined even if they avoid prison," Henry observed. "Bankruptcy, damaged credit, civil judgments that will follow them for decades." I thought about the house Dane and I had shared, the one he'd assumed he could claim in a divorce settlement. Now it would probably be sold to pay legal fees and restitution. The life he'd planned with Lana, the one that was supposed to be so much better than what we'd had become a nightmare of courtrooms and debt collectors. "Henry," I said quietly, "I think they're getting exactly what they deserve." "No," he replied, "they're getting exactly what they chose." The evidence kept mounting with the relentless precision of an avalanche. Marcus Chen's investigation had evolved from documenting an affair to building what federal prosecutors were calling one of the most comprehensive white-collar cases of the year. Every day brought new discoveries that painted an increasingly damning picture of systematic fraud and deception. Friday morning brought a development that left me speechless. Henry arrived at my house with a thick folder and the grim expression of someone who'd seen too much. "Marcus obtained their complete email records through legal discovery," he said, settling into my kitchen chair. "Emily, you need to see this, but I warn you, it's going to be painful." He opened the folder to reveal printed emails dating back 8 months. The subject lines alone told a story: expense strategies, client account protocols, managing our situation. I read the first email, dated 3 weeks after Dane and I had celebrated our anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. While I had been planning a surprise weekend getaway for his birthday, he had been writing to Lana about maximizing our entertainment budget through creative billing approaches. "The Peterson account has significant monthly allowances for client development activities," Dane had written. "As long as we're strategic about documentation, we can easily justify $2 to $3K monthly in relationship-building expenses." Lana's response was equally calculated. "I researched the guidelines. Corporate entertainment can include fostering professional relationships that benefit client interests. We just need to be smart about it." I felt sick reading their casual discussion of theft,
couched in corporate jargon that made it sound like legitimate business strategy. But it got worse. "Look at this one from 4 months ago," Henry said, pointing to an email exchange about their Martha's Vineyard trip. "Lana, the charity foundation has educational conference funding available, $15K allocated for professional development in corporate law." Dane, "Perfect. I'll register us for that Harvard symposium. It's the same weekend we plan to go anyway. 2 birds, 1 stone." Lana, "I love how efficiently your mind works. This is exactly why we're perfect partners." Partners. They had been planning their systematic theft while calling each other partners, treating the destruction of our marriages like a business venture with built-in funding from other people's money. "There's more," Henry said quietly. "Read this one from 6 weeks ago." The email was titled Exit Strategy Timeline, and it laid out their plan in chilling detail. Dane would finalize his partnership equity buyout by December. Lana would complete her transition to senior associate and vest her profit-sharing benefits by January. They would submit resignations simultaneously in February, citing new opportunities and expanded markets. "By March, we'll be in San Francisco with clean records and no entanglements," Dane had written. "A fresh start for both of us." "Can't wait to leave this small-town mentality behind," Lana had replied. "San Francisco firms understand that success requires bold thinking." "Entanglements," I said aloud. "That's what we were to them. Entanglements."
It gets worse, Henry said, turning to another section. Marcus found their apartment applications for San Francisco. They were planning to move in together in March, assuming their spouses would be handled appropriately by then. The apartment listings were for luxury condos with Bay Area views, monthly rents that exceeded most people's annual salaries. They had budgeted for this lifestyle using money they planned to steal from clients and the charity foundation, combined with equity they were earning while systematically betraying their employer's trust. How did they think they'd get away with this? "Look at this email from 3 months ago," Henry said. "They discuss it directly." Dane, "The beauty of our approach is that by the time anyone notices patterns in the billing, we'll be gone. Morrison won't pursue former partners aggressively, bad for firm reputation." Lana, "Plus, our performance reviews are stellar. No one suspects that successful attorneys would risk their careers over expense accounts." Dane, "Exactly. We're hiding in plain sight. Success is the perfect camouflage." Their arrogance was breathtaking. They had genuinely believed that their professional achievements made them untouchable, that their positions at the firm provided immunity from consequences. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. Marcus had uncovered a series of emails between Lana and a contact at a competing firm, someone who had apparently been helping them plan their transition to San Francisco. "My colleagues are very impressed with both your credentials," the contact had written. "The partnership track here moves faster for attorneys with your experience level. We're prepared to offer significant signing bonuses to secure your commitment." Lana's response, "We appreciate the confidence. Our current situation has some complexities that require discreet handling, but we anticipate being available for transition by March, as discussed." Understood. Corporate transitions often involve delicate timing. We're prepared to be flexible regarding start dates and any non-compete considerations. They had been negotiating new jobs while actively stealing from their current employer. The San Francisco firm, one of the most prestigious on the West Coast, had been prepared to pay them signing bonuses to join their corporate law division. "Did you contact the San Francisco firm?" I asked. Marcus did, yes. They withdrew their offers immediately and are cooperating with the federal investigation. Apparently, they're mortified to have been unknowingly recruiting federal crime suspects. I imagined the conversation, where prestigious California lawyers learned that their promising new hires were actually defendants in a fraud case involving children's cancer charity theft. The legal community was smaller than most people realized. Word would spread quickly. "There's one more thing," Henry said, pulling out the final section of emails. "These are from last week, after they knew they were under investigation." The final emails showed 2 people in complete panic, each trying to save themselves at the other's expense. Lana had been secretly copying evidence to her personal accounts, apparently building a case to blame Dane for initiating the fraud.
Meanwhile, Dane had been documenting every luxury purchase Lana had requested, creating his own trail of evidence to prove she had been an enthusiastic participant. "I have receipts for every gift you asked for," Dane had written 3 days ago. "Every restaurant you chose, every trip you suggested. If you try to paint me as the mastermind, I'll show them exactly how eager you were to spend other people's money." Lana's reply: "Go ahead. I have emails showing you initiated every billing irregularity and pressured me to participate. Let's see who the jury believes, the predatory male partner or the female associate who was afraid to refuse her superior's demands." Even facing federal prosecution, they were still trying to manipulate and control the narrative. But now they were manipulating each other, and the mutual destruction was almost surgical in its precision. "They're each other's worst enemies now," Henry observed. "They always were," I said, closing the folder. "They just didn't know it yet." That evening, Marcus sent his final update of the week. Both defense teams had requested separate trial dates, and both were seeking to introduce evidence of the other defendant's primary culpability in the fraud scheme. The love affair that had destroyed 2 marriages and ruined dozens of lives had devolved into a legal death match where the only goal was ensuring the other person faced worst consequences. I looked at my storm painting, now nearly complete. The dark clouds were almost entirely dispersed, replaced by brilliant sunshine and clear sky. Sometimes, I reflected, justice looked exactly like watching people destroy themselves with their own choices. The weekend brought an unexpected quiet. No frantic phone calls, no desperate text messages, no updates from Marcus about new evidence or legal developments. It felt like the eye of a hurricane, a deceptive calm before whatever came next. I spent Saturday morning in my studio, putting the finishing touches on my storm painting. The metaphor had become so literal that I almost laughed as I added the final highlights to the emerging sunshine. Sometimes life provided its own artistic inspiration. That's when I heard the car in my driveway. Not the tentative approach of someone hoping to avoid confrontation, but the aggressive acceleration of someone who had made a decision and intended to follow through with it. I looked out the window to see Dane's BMW, followed immediately by a smaller sedan I didn't recognize. Both cars sat in my driveway like an invasion force, engines ticking as they cooled in the afternoon silence. Dane emerged first, looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated into something that suggested he'd been sleeping in his clothes. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and relentless anxiety. Behind him, Lana climbed out of the sedan. She looked marginally better. Her clothes were clean, her hair styled, but there was something brittle about her composure, like glass under pressure. They didn't speak to each other, didn't even look at each other, but moved toward my front door with the coordinated desperation of people who had exhausted all other options. The doorbell rang once, twice, then dissolved into aggressive knocking. "Emily, please," Dane's voice carried through the door. "We know you're home. We just want to talk." "We need to talk," Lana added, her voice higher than usual, strained with barely controlled panic. I considered ignoring them, letting them stand on my porch until they gave up and left, but curiosity won out. I wanted to see what 2 people facing federal prosecution and mutual betrayal looked like when they tried to present a united front. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. They stood on my porch like supplicants, their earlier arrogance replaced by something I'd never seen from either of them before: genuine fear. "What do you want?" I asked. "We've been thinking about everything," Dane started, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to get them out. "About the situation, about the legal complications, about how this affects everyone." "Everyone?" I repeated. "You, Henry, the firm, the employees who are losing their jobs," Lana added quickly. "We never intended for innocent people to get hurt." I almost laughed. They had spent months systematically planning to abandon everyone in their lives, and now they were claiming concern for innocent people. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We want to make this right," Dane said. "Full restitution to every account we used, plus interest and penalties. We'll cooperate completely with the investigation, accept responsibility for our actions. Accept responsibility, I said slowly. Both of you? Together? They exchanged a quick glance, the first acknowledgement of each other's presence since they'd arrived. We've been talking, Lana said carefully. Our lawyers think that if we present a united front, if we both take responsibility and agree to make full restitution, the prosecutors might be willing to negotiate reduced charges. Your lawyers think this. The same lawyers who were building cases against each other just 2 days ago? Another uncomfortable glance between them. We fired our criminal attorneys, Dane admitted. We hired a new team that specializes in joint defense strategies. They think we have a better chance if we cooperate instead of fighting each other. And what does this have to do with me? We need character witnesses, Lana said, her professional composure starting to crack. People who can testify that we're not the criminals the prosecutors are making us out to be. That we made mistakes, but we're fundamentally good people who got caught up in a situation that spiraled out of control. You want me to testify that you're a good person? I said to Dane, the man who destroyed our marriage and stole $60,000 to fund his affair? You want me to testify that you're a good person? I said to Lana, when you helped steal money from children with cancer? The color drained from both their faces. Emily, please, Dane said, his voice breaking slightly. I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices. But if these charges stand, if we both go to prison, it destroys more than just us. Your financial security, Henry's. My financial security was never dependent on your criminal career, I interrupted. And Henry's business has nothing to do with your legal troubles. But the civil lawsuits, Lana pressed, the restitution demands, they're talking about seizing all our assets, including the house you live in, Henry's properties. The house I live in, I corrected, became my sole property the moment you decided to commit federal crimes with joint assets. And Henry's properties are protected because he had nothing to do with your fraud. I could see the desperation growing in both their expressions as they realized I understood the legal situation better than they'd hoped. What do you want from us? Dane asked finally. What would it take for you to help us? I studied their faces. These two people who had been so confident, so certain of their superiority just weeks ago. Now they stood on my porch begging for help from the women they had discarded like outdated furniture. I want you to understand something, I said quietly. 3 months ago, if you had simply asked for divorces honestly, we would have been hurt, but we would have survived. If you had left your jobs honorably and moved to San Francisco with clean consciences, you might even have been happy. They stared at me, waiting. But you chose deception. You chose theft. You chose to destroy marriages, steal from charities, and betray everyone who trusted you. And now you want the people you betrayed to save you from the consequences of your own choices. We can make it right, Lana started. No, I said firmly. You can't. You can pay back the money, you can apologize, you can cooperate with prosecutors, but you can't make it right. Those employees who lost their jobs, the cancer research that was defunded, the trust that was broken, none of that can be made right. So you won't help us, Dane said, his voice hollow. I won't lie for you, I corrected. If prosecutors want to ask me about your character, I'll tell them exactly what I know. About the husband who spent months planning to abandon me while using stolen money to fund his affair. About the woman who helped him steal from sick children to pay for luxury vacations. That's not fair, Lana began. That's exactly fair, I said. That's what fairness looks like. Actions have consequences, and you don't get to choose which consequences you face. I stepped back inside and began to close the door. Emily, wait, Dane called desperately. Please, we have nowhere else to turn. Then you should have thought of that, I said, before you burned down your own lives. I closed the door and watched through the window as they stood on my porch for several more minutes, talking in urgent whispers. Finally, they walked back to their cars, still not looking at each other, still trapped in their alliance of mutual destruction. As they drove away, I realized I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. Just the quiet certainty that justice sometimes looked exactly like watching people reap what they had sown. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about the scope of Dane and Lana's crimes. The caller identified herself as Agent Sarah Mills from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force, and her first words sent a chill through me. "Mrs. Ashford, we need to speak with you about your husband's activities. We've uncovered evidence that suggests this case is significantly more complex than initial reports indicated." An hour later, I sat in a sterile conference room at the federal building downtown, across from Agent Mills and two other investigators whose business cards identified them as specialists in white-collar crime and financial fraud. The folder Agent Mills placed on the table between us was easily 3 times thicker than anything Marcus Chen had compiled. "Mrs. Ashford, what we're about to show you is evidence that will likely be presented in federal court. We want you to understand the full scope of what your husband and Miss Hench were involved in." She opened the folder to reveal bank records, transaction logs, and financial documents that painted a picture far more devastating than I had imagined. The billing fraud that had cost Morrison Associates their major clients was apparently just the visible tip of a much deeper iceberg. "Your husband had been skimming from client settlements for over 2 years," Agent Mills explained, pointing to highlighted entries and account ledgers. "Small amounts initially, never more than what might be explained as accounting errors, but the pattern shows systematic theft totaling nearly $200,000. $200,000? I stared at the numbers, trying to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. This wasn't expense account abuse or credit card fraud. This was industrial-level theft from clients who had trusted Dane to manage their legal settlements. "Miss Hench joined the scheme approximately 18 months ago," another agent continued, "initially as a co-conspirator, but the evidence suggests she was also being systematically defrauded by your husband." "What do you mean?" "Your husband was telling Miss Hench that the money was being used for joint expenses, their relationship, their planned move to San Francisco. But our analysis shows that approximately 60% of the stolen funds were being diverted to accounts Miss Hench had no access to." I felt a moment of surprised sympathy for Lana before catching myself. She had still participated in stealing from clients and charities, regardless of whether Dane was also stealing from her. Where was the money going? Agent Mills turned to another section of the folder: cryptocurrency investments, offshore accounts, and what appears to be preparation for a much more extensive disappearance than Miss Hench was aware of. The evidence was staggering. While Lana had been planning their romantic escape to San Francisco, Dane had been establishing financial footholds in countries without extradition treaties. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, digital currency wallets, even what appeared to be preliminary real estate inquiries in South America. "He was planning to abandon her," I said quietly. "The evidence suggests that your husband intended to disappear entirely once he had accumulated sufficient funds. Miss Hench appears to have been unaware of this aspect of his planning." I thought about their emails discussing their exit strategy and fresh start. While Lana had been envisioning a new life as a successful law firm power couple, Dane had been planning to vanish with stolen money, leaving her to face the consequences alone. "There's more," Agent Mills said, turning to the final section. "We've identified at least 12 other attorneys across 3 states who were involved in similar schemes with your husband. He was recruiting lawyers from other firms to participate in systematic client fund diversions." He was running a criminal network? A sophisticated one. Each attorney would skim small amounts from settlements and personal injury awards, transferring the funds through a complex network designed to obscure the source. Your husband was essentially operating as a criminal banker for corrupt lawyers. The scope was breathtaking. While I had been living with him, sharing meals and conversations and a bed, Dane had been operating a multi-state criminal enterprise that had stolen millions of dollars from clients who had already suffered injuries, losses, and trauma. "Ms. Hench's participation appears to have been limited to the Morrison Associates operation," another agent added. But she was unknowingly helping to launder funds from the broader network through their joint expenses and luxury purchases. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Henry, FBI at your house? Everything okay?" I showed the message to Agent Mills, who nodded permission for me to respond. "At Federal Building, you need to hear this. Can you come downtown?" "On my way." While we waited for Henry, Agent Mills walked me through the timeline of Dane's criminal evolution. It had started small, minor adjustments to billing that no one would notice, but success had bred ambition, and ambition had bred the systematic network that was now unraveling across multiple states. The investigation currently involves 14 defendants across 4 jurisdictions, she explained. Your husband appears to be the central coordinator, which means he's facing the most serious charges. How serious? If convicted on all counts, he's looking at potential sentences of 35 to 40 years in federal prison. 40 years. Even with cooperation and plea bargaining, Dane was facing the possibility of spending the rest of his productive life in prison. The man who had coldly calculated how to steal from vulnerable clients would now have decades to contemplate the consequences of those choices. Henry arrived just as Agent Mills was explaining the broader implications of the case. His face went pale as he absorbed the scale of the criminal network his wife had unknowingly helped facilitate. "Lana really didn't know about the other lawyers?" he asked. "The evidence suggests she believed she was participating in isolated billing irregularities, not systematic money laundering for a criminal network. That may work in her favor during sentencing, but it doesn't change her culpability for the crimes we can prove." "What happens next?" I asked. "Grand jury indictments for all 14 defendants within the next 2 weeks. Your husband will likely be offered the opportunity to cooperate against the other network members in exchange for reduced sentencing, but given his central role, his exposure remains substantial." Agent Mills gathered the documents and prepared to leave, but paused to deliver one final piece of information that left me speechless. "Mrs. Ashford, you should know that our investigation began because one of the victim clients contacted the FBI directly. An elderly woman whose personal injury settlement was reduced by nearly $50,000 through your husband's manipulations. She spent months trying to get answers from Morrison Associates before contacting federal authorities. An elderly woman, someone's grandmother, probably, who had been injured and then systematically robbed by the lawyer she trusted to protect her interests. The personal nature of Dane's victims made his crimes feel even more despicable. As Henry and I left the federal building, I realized that everything I thought I knew about the extent of Dane's betrayal had been just the beginning. He hadn't just destroyed our marriage and stolen from his firm. He had built a criminal empire that had caused suffering across multiple states. "Emily," Henry said quietly as we reached our cars, "I think we've been witnessing something much bigger than we realized." "I think," I replied, "we've been witnessing exactly who Dane really was all along. We just couldn't see it because we trusted him." That evening, I sat in my studio staring at my completed storm painting. The metaphor of clearing skies and emerging sunshine felt inadequate now. This wasn't just about weathering a personal crisis. It was about discovering that the person I had shared my life with was fundamentally different from who I had believed him to be. But even that realization brought a strange kind of peace. I hadn't lost a good man to temporary weakness or midlife crisis. I had escaped from someone whose capacity for deception and cruelty ran deeper than I could have imagined. The news broke on a Tuesday morning with the kind of media attention that turns local scandals into national stories. I was having coffee when Morgan called, her voice breathless with excitement and horror. "Turn on Channel 7, now." I reached for the remote and found myself staring at a live news report from the steps of the federal courthouse. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, "Multi-State Legal Fraud Network Exposed, 14 Attorneys in $3.2 million Theft Scheme." Federal prosecutors announced today the largest legal profession fraud case in state history, the reporter was saying. At the center of the alleged criminal network is prominent local attorney Dane Ashford, accused of recruiting lawyers across multiple states to systematically steal from client settlements and personal injury awards. There was Dane's partnership photo from Morrison Associates, displayed next to mugshots of 13 other attorneys from firms across the region. The visual impact was devastating. Row after row of professional headshots transformed into criminal defendant photos, each representing a lawyer who had betrayed their client's trust. The camera cut to a press conference where a federal prosecutor was outlining the scope of the investigation. Behind her, blown-up charts showed the flow of stolen money through various accounts, with Dane's name prominently featured at the center of the network. Mr. Ashford allegedly served as the central coordinator for this criminal enterprise, recruiting other attorneys and facilitating the laundering of stolen funds through a sophisticated system of accounts and transactions. My phone started ringing immediately. Reporters, friends, distant relatives who had suddenly remembered my existence. I turned off the phone and continued watching as the story unfolded across multiple news channels. The local stations were treating it as the biggest story of the year. The theft of millions from vulnerable clients, the involvement of respected attorneys, the systematic nature of the fraud. It had all the elements that made for compelling television. But it was the victim interviews that made the story truly heartbreaking. "I trusted him completely," an elderly man told a reporter, his voice shaking with emotion. "He was supposed to help me get compensation for my wife's medical bills after the accident. Instead, he stole from us when we needed that money most." Another victim, a woman whose settlement from a workplace injury had been reduced by nearly $30,000, spoke through tears. "We couldn't understand why the settlement was so much lower than what we'd been told to expect. Now we know it's because our own lawyer was stealing from us." The human cost of Dane's crimes was devastating to witness. These weren't abstract financial losses. They were real people who had suffered real injuries and then been victimized again by the person they had trusted to protect their interests. By afternoon, the story had expanded beyond local news. National networks picked up the story as an example of systematic corruption within the legal profession. Cable news shows featured panels of experts discussing how such widespread fraud could have gone undetected for so long. The sophistication of this scheme suggests these defendants believed they were essentially immune from consequences, one legal analyst explained. They were stealing from the most vulnerable clients, people who were already traumatized and unlikely to question their attorney's handling of settlement funds. The professional consequences began cascading immediately. Morrison Associates held an emergency press conference to announce they were fully cooperating with federal authorities and had terminated all relationships with Dane Ashford. 3 other law firms across the region made similar announcements about their own implicated attorneys. But the most damaging coverage came when reporters began investigating the personal lives of the defendants. The story of Dane's affair with Lana, their use of stolen money to fund luxury lifestyle choices, the destruction of their marriages, it all became part of the narrative. Court documents show that Ashford used stolen client funds to pay for expensive dinners, jewelry, and luxury vacations with a fellow attorney at his firm, one reporter explained. The affair apparently began around the same time the theft scheme intensified. They showed photographs of the restaurants where Dane and Lana had dined on stolen money, the hotel where they had stayed during their Martha's Vineyard weekend funded by charity theft. Every detail of their relationship was being dissected and broadcast to thousands of viewers. My phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "Are you watching this?" "Unfortunately, yes. How are you holding up?" "Better than expected. Seeing it all laid out publicly actually helps. Makes it clear this was never about us being inadequate spouses." He was right. The scope and sophistication of Dane's criminal network made it obvious that our marriages had simply been convenient cover for someone who was fundamentally dishonest. We hadn't failed as spouses. We had been systematically deceived by someone whose capacity for manipulation was far beyond what either of us could have recognized. That evening, the story took another turn when investigators revealed that Dane had been preparing to flee the country. Video footage showed federal agents searching a storage unit where they had discovered forged documents, foreign currency, and detailed plans for disappearing to South America. The evidence suggests that Ashford was planning to abandon not only his wife and law firm, but also his co-conspirators, a federal agent explained to reporters. He appears to have been systematically preparing for complete disappearance once he had accumulated sufficient stolen funds. The final devastating blow came when they interviewed Lana's attorney outside the courthouse. Disheveled and clearly overwhelmed, he confirmed that his client had been unaware of the broader criminal network and was cooperating fully with federal investigators. Miss Hench believed she was participating in minor billing irregularities, not systematic theft from vulnerable clients, he stated. She had no knowledge of Mr. Ashford's plans to flee the country or abandon their relationship. Even his criminal defense attorney was throwing him under the bus. The man who had once commanded respect and fear in courtrooms across the state was now being abandoned by everyone who had ever worked with him. As the news coverage continued into the evening, I realized I was watching the complete destruction of everything Dane had spent his life building. His reputation, his career, his freedom, his relationships, all of it was being systematically dismantled in real time, broadcast to anyone with a television or internet connection. But what struck me most was how little I felt watching his public humiliation. This wasn't the man I had married. This was someone who had been wearing a mask for so long that even he might have forgotten who he really was underneath. The storm in my painting had cleared completely now, revealing not just sunshine, but a completely different landscape than what had been there before. Sometimes, I reflected, you had to lose everything you thought you knew to discover what was actually true. 6 months later, I stood in the Riverside Gallery watching people admire my latest collection, a series I had titled After the Storm. The paintings had evolved from my original Clearing Sky piece into an exploration of renewal, truth, and the strange beauty that emerges when illusions are finally stripped away.
The emotional honesty in these pieces is remarkable, a collector was telling the gallery owner. There's something about the way she captures light breaking through darkness that feels deeply personal. If only he knew how personal. The entire collection had been born from the wreckage of my marriage and the shocking revelation of who my husband really was. But out of that destruction had come a clarity and creative freedom I'd never experienced before. My phone buzzed with a text from Henry. Sentencing hearing today. Thought you should know. I stepped outside the gallery to call him back. How did it go? Dane got 27 years federal prison. No possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Henry's voice was steady, matter of fact. Lana got 8 years, eligible for parole in 4 with good behavior. 27 years? I tried to imagine Dane at 67 years old, finally walking out of federal prison as an elderly man with no career, no reputation, no family waiting for him. The life he had built through decades of deception and manipulation was effectively over. How do you feel about it? I asked. Relieved, Henry said without hesitation. Justice was served. The victims got their money back through asset forfeiture, and 2 people who caused tremendous damage are being held accountable for their choices. The asset forfeiture had been comprehensive. Everything Dane and Lana owned had been seized and liquidated. Homes, cars, jewelry, even Dane's precious law school diplomas. The money had been distributed to their victims, with interest and penalties that ensured full compensation for the financial and emotional damage they had caused. There's something else, Henry continued. Lana testified against Dane during his sentencing hearing. She provided details about how he manipulated her into participating in the scheme. Even after everything, Lana was still trying to minimize her own culpability. But the transcripts I'd read made it clear that while Dane had initiated the fraud, she had been an enthusiastic participant once she understood the benefits. The luxury lifestyle, the expensive trips, the designer clothes. She had enjoyed every stolen dollar while it lasted. Do you think she was really manipulated? I think she made choices, just like he did, Henry said. Maybe different choices, maybe lesser choices, but still her choices. The sentence reflects that. After we hung up, I walked back into the gallery and stood in front of my favorite piece from the collection. A painting of dawn breaking over calm water, with storm debris floating on the surface, but transforming into something almost beautiful in the early light. That one's my favorite too, a voice said behind me.
I turned to find Marcus Chen, looking different in civilian clothes than he had during the months of investigation. Mr. Chen, I didn't expect to see you here. I heard about your exhibition through Henry. I wanted to see how the story ended for you. He studied the painting thoughtfully. It's quite a transformation from where you were a year ago. A year ago, I had been living a lie, married to a criminal, building my life around someone who was systematically destroying the lives of vulnerable people. Now, I stood in a gallery full of my own work, financially independent, emotionally free, surrounded by people who appreciated art for its beauty rather than its strategic value. Marcus continued, "If you ever regret how everything unfolded, if you sometimes wish you'd stayed ignorant of what he really was." I considered the question seriously. There had been moments, especially during the worst of the media attention, when the simplicity of my former life had seemed appealing, but those moments had always passed, replaced by gratitude for the truth. "No," I said finally, "I'm grateful. Not for the pain he caused to all those victims, not for the damage to innocent people, but grateful that I learned who he really was before I wasted any more of my life on someone who was fundamentally dishonest." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's wisdom. A lot of people in your situation never reach that understanding." As the evening progressed, I found myself surrounded by people interested in my work, my story, my perspective on resilience and renewal. The art gallery that had once displayed my paintings as a courtesy to the wife of a successful attorney now featured my work because of its own merit. Around 9 o'clock, as the event was winding down, Morgan appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine and a satisfied smile. "So," she said, "what's next for the newly famous artist?" I looked around the gallery, at the red dots appearing next to my paintings as sales were finalized, at the business cards I'd collected from collectors and other gallery owners, at the evidence of a life I had built entirely on my own terms. "I've been thinking about traveling," I said. "There's a residency program in Tuscany that accepts applications for next fall. 6 months of painting Italian landscapes without any complications from criminal husbands or federal investigations." "That sounds perfect," Morgan said. "You've earned some uncomplicated beauty in your life." As I drove home that night, I passed the exit that would have taken me to the federal prison where Dane was beginning his 27-year sentence. I felt nothing as I drove past. No sadness, no vindication, no curiosity about what his life looked like now. He had made his choices, and now he would live with them for the next 3 decades. I had made different choices, and I would live with those too. At home, I walked through the house that was now entirely mine. No hidden criminal activity, no secret bank accounts, no lies waiting to be discovered. Just quiet space where I could create, think, and build whatever came next. I stood in front of my easel, where a new canvas waited for whatever inspiration tomorrow might bring. The storm was over, the wreckage had been cleared away, and the landscape ahead was entirely mine to paint. For the first time in years, I had no idea what came next, and that uncertainty felt like the most beautiful freedom I had ever known.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.